Alright, today is the day I test my FTP. Over the last 6 weeks, I've averaged 9.5 hours of cycling per week, which has been pretty consistent for me. I've done mostly outdoor rides, some indoor rides, on Zwift of course. Rides have ranged from endurance rides to sweet spot to some VO2 intervals. So now I'm just curious to see what kind of progress I've made. So let's get on with this ramp test. I did the ramp test on TrainerRoad, and the way this ramp test works is they start you off with 46% of your current FTP. So for me, my current FTP was 241 watts. 46% of that would be 110 watts, so I warm up for 5 minutes at that. Then they ramp me up in 1 minute increments, increasing my target power by 6%. So the next step would be 200, or it would be 46% plus 6 would be 51, and the next one after that would be 57% of FTP, and so on until you basically fail.
11 minutes in, heart rate's about a little bit still in zone 2. I think the peak from my zone 2 is 153 BPM, so still feeling all right. Cadence throughout this entire test I was trying to keep above 90 because it felt easier, but you'll see later that I struggled to hold above 90. Heart rate is creeping up above my threshold, and let's move on to closer to the end. Now my target's 298. You'll see my heart rate is 171, 172, which my max heart rate for context is 189 when I'm running, but 172 on the bike is extremely high for me. Alright, now we have a target power of 327, heart rate's at 177, which has got to be one of the highest heart rates I've seen on a bike. And you'll see my cadence has dropped. I can't keep a cadence over 90 now, I'm just doing mid 80s. Alright, this is the last step. You'll see my cadence in the 70s, heart rate 179. I'm struggling here. Power's dropping, cadence is dropping, and I'm done. I couldn't hold on any longer, but I still went up 8 watts to 249 from 241, so not too bad. Now I just need to catch my breath so I can finish up the rest of this video.
Basically fail. Looking at my data here on TrainerRoad, we can see that I lasted 16 steps, which was about 142% of my current FTP, which was 241. And then once you fail, then they take your last 1 minute power and take 75% of that as an estimate of your FTP. So I failed on step 16. I was supposed to do 342 watts, but I didn't. I was doing 318, and I was grinding hard, so I failed there, and the calculation ended up with me being at 249 watts, which is an 8 watt increment from where I was. Looking at training peaks, we see that I got a new 5 minute power of 305 watts, so pretty stoked about that. I guess anytime you do one of these ramp tests, you have to get a new 5 minute power to increase your FTP. So hopefully I see more of those in the next several months. Most of my training over the last 6 weeks was cycling, as seen here in the first chart. I barely did any running, and the other activity is strength work that I'm doing to try and supplement my cycling and running and to prevent injury. If we look at the next chart, you can see the duration by week for my bike specifically, and I averaged 9.5 hours for each week over the last 6 weeks, peaking at about almost actually it was 15 hours was my biggest week, and then my shortest week was a little bit over 8 hours, so not too bad. For those of you interested in TSS, of course, the biggest week resulted in the biggest TSS, which was 830 TSS. This is just cycling, by the way. And then the lowest TSS week was about 500, with an average of 537 over the last 6 weeks. So not too bad. I am coming down a little bit, so I'm wondering if I did this ramp test a little bit earlier, so maybe a week or two ago, if I would have gotten a better FTP, but it is what it is. It's a measure of where I am now, so I'm fine with it. Now we're looking at heart rate zones. This was something that was interesting to me, and these heart rate zones are mostly all bike, so you can see the bulk of it was in zone 1, and a tiny bit was in the higher zones, the VO2 zones. So what this is telling me is that I was doing most of my riding, and let me rephrase that. So since I was in zone 1 most of the time, I wasn't doing any peak efforts to try and boost the FTP. So this is great for me building my base, but it's helpful for me to have the foundation to do that, but I also need to increase my power by doing these top end efforts, which according to heart rate, I wasn't doing a lot of over the last 6 weeks. And you can see a similar picture in power. Most of my power was in the lower zones, and the higher zones like 5 and 6, you can see I only spent like 7% total over the last 6 weeks in those power zones. So maybe it's time for me to do a little bit more VO2 efforts, maybe throw in some more Zwift racing, because that gets me to push pretty hard. And then the last thing that's also pretty cool is I've been tracking my weight, and it's been kind of declining over the last few weeks. So if I want to get faster, especially on the climbs, I've got to drop some kgs, So that's it. Overall, I'm happy with where I'm at. I did see some progress. I did learn a few things. So now it's time to adapt, make some changes, and hopefully keep increasing that power before my first race, which who knows when that'll be. Hopefully at least one this year. If not, I'll see you at St. George next year. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. Adios.